Greetings and welcome back to Give the People What They Want. We are finally back after a brief hiatus, and I'm very, very excited to be joined by Roger McKenzie, who's the international editor for Morning Star News, and Prasanth, an Indian journalist. We're really, really excited to be back with you to be discussing the key news updates every week, movement updates, and giving you the perspective you definitely won't hear on mainstream media. So buckle up. We know it's been a lot of months, a lot of changes, and we have a lot to discuss.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup.
Great. Well, really excited to dig into everything today. I think one of the main things that's different from the last time we recorded until now is that now Donald Trump is the president of the United States. And as we know, the president of the United States does not only impact what happens domestically within the US, but has a huge, huge impact on what happens abroad. And that is definitely being felt with just 2 months of his administration. We can definitely say that the global scenario, the global stage is definitely much changed. This week, the biggest Trump scandal is the quite serious leak of, classified information about airstrikes in Yemen. And it's interesting because, this is a journalist, the editor of The Atlantic, released an article saying that he was accidentally added to a Signal group chat with members of the Trump administration, such as J.D. Vance, the vice president, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and several others, Marco Rubio. He says that basically in this chat, they are essentially planning and debating whether or not to strike Yemen. And I think what's very important about this political moment and about what this scandal, which is one of many that have taken place over the past 2 months of the Trump administration, really reveals is that on one hand, you have these very, very kind of pompous, warmongering people, Pete Hegseth just saying, we just want to get him. He's also complaining about how the Europeans, are not doing their part. And we're going to get to that with Roger about, the European element of this. And, saying, well, is it a good time to attack Yemen now? Should we wait? All these deliberations. And what's interesting is that when the Atlantic report comes out, we don't really see a condemnation of the U.S. policy of attacking Yemen for upholding a blockade because of Israel's genocide in Gaza. But we see a liberal who is concerned with the way in which members of the Trump administration are handling themselves and handling digital security. And of course, this really missed the mark. This misses the mark once again. And it is kind of reminiscent of what was happening during the first Trump administration, where liberals, had their whole, oh, Trump isn't doing things right. Look at, how he's not following our perfect democracy. And once again, missing all of the violations of both human rights domestically and abroad. And especially in this moment, not even questioning the fact that the U.S. is launching unilateral airstrikes against targets in Yemen, a country which was, on the brink of famine several years ago, is really atrocious. And I think as we continue the show, we're going to continue following, unfortunately, all of the attacks that the Trump administration is lodging on people across the globe, despite claiming, which we knew was a hollow claim, that he was going to be a president of peace. He has not been a president of peace. The genocide in Gaza has resumed. We're going to talk about that as well. Airstrikes on Yemen for no other reason than to just show that the U.S. is able to do that, it seems, because that's exactly what they said in these chats. And at the same time, of course, despite saying in some way that Trump was going to be a president for working people and making their economic situation better, he, of course, has gone after federal workers, one of the largest workforces in the country, cutting jobs, cutting benefits, doing the same old thing that we know that the conservatives do. And the Democrats, again, are waging this kind of halfway battle against Trumpist attacks, but also kind of playing dead as Chuck Schumer did. But it's not all bad. There has been a lot of fight back. And I know we're going to continue to talk about that over the coming weeks. The Palestine Solidarity Movement is back in action, especially resisting the attacks on student activists and the deportations. But we will definitely come back to that because it's a larger story. I think we can hear from Prasanth about what's been happening in the past couple of weeks in Palestine and Israel.
Right. So just picking up from your point about Trump, when he was about to take office, he did say that he was going to end wars. He really touted that truce he apparently brought about. Of course, what that showed was that the US could have, under the Biden administration too, could have enforced that ceasefire much earlier. But what has happened over the past 10 days makes it very clear that, that ceasefire was just something he wanted to sort of set in place so that, he could have something to show when he was taking power, because we have seen Israel going back to its old ways with a vengeance since it broke the ceasefire on the 18th of March, I believe. It's been over a week now. The numbers are already horrific. Over 700 people dead, over 140,000 Palestinians in Gaza evicted, have been displaced. And Israeli ground forces, once again, on the ground doing what they were doing during the earlier months of the war, which is basically take over key cities, especially in the north, try to push people towards the south, try to create conditions of famine and hope. And here, of course, they've got Trump support as well on this, and try to create pressure so that they leave Palestine and that ethnic cleansing plan gets implemented. And that's really been Israel's pursuit all this while, and we know that because what is happening basically is that people once again, mass displacement taking place, attack on aid, for instance. We know that I think the latest numbers show that over 399 aid workers have been killed, including some very recently. Flour is running out, bakeries are shutting down, the prices of essential vegetables are all soaring because of these attacks. And also important to remember, much before Israel broke the ceasefire, it actually imposed this blockade. Even while technically the ceasefire was on, it imposed this blockade on 1st or 2nd of March on the delivery of humanitarian goods as well. All that leading to a massive crunch. So it's very clear what Israel's game is with the full-fledged support of the United States. That is really try to push as many Palestinians as possible out of this territory. They're trying to get Egypt into this game so that Egypt hosts as many people as possible. Egypt, of course, realizes that the moment they do that, it will cause a massive crisis internally, so they're trying to sort of stay away. But this is really what is a larger game, and all that narrative, all that discourse about how it's about the hostages is completely fraudulent, because it's just about one thing. On the one hand, killing Palestinians, on the other hand, evicting them. And we're also seeing a version of this in the West Bank, where there's been this attack on as many of all the refugee camps, all the major refugee camps over there, hundreds of thousands of houses being demolished, decimated. And on the other hand, settlers being given a free hand. Their settlements are being integrated or made legal in various ways possible. And we have the most extreme right-wing versions, the most extreme right-wing section in Israel gaining strength with every passing day, full legitimacy for them. And this really asks, I think, certain questions of the so-called international community, which is always willing to come up with platitudes at various, on so many other issues, that the only hope that has been there has been the people demonstrating on the streets. But what have most of the governments, especially in the global north, have been doing except supporting Israel 100% full-fledgedly? And it's also important to note that Palestine is closely also connected, like we said, with Yemen. Yemen being one of the few countries which is actually full-fledgedly come out in support, but also very also connected to Iran. And I think it's an important thing we need to note, which is that the talk of war against Iran is very, very dangerous at this point. We know that a carrier strike group has apparently come to the region, and this is really alarming for everyone in this world. So the whole of the region in a massive crisis, but of course the focal point being the people of Gaza, who are really once again enduring what are really genocidal attacks. And Also, I think important to note, since we're on this show, the attacks on journalists once again continuing. I believe 2 journalists killed in the past 48 hours or so. And and their notes that at least one journalist has written about how he spent 1.5 years really anticipating that this could happen any moment and hoping that the stories of the Palestinians will continue to be told. So extremely grim picture. But like I said, globally, the protests haven't stopped. We know that the International People's Assembly has called for a 2-week, marches and protests in solidarity, protests taking place across the world. People's Dispatch has been carrying some great visuals of some of those protests. So I think that's really the only sign of hope at this point of time, that these protests can force some of their governments or exert pressure on some of their governments.
Well, this is definitely going to be a story that we continue to follow, as we have for all of our time at People's Dispatch. And now we're going to head over to Europe, which, again, big talks of peace, but what has really happened since Trump has taken office and this kind of European scramble?
Well, I mean, I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is that has it really only been 2 months since Trump has come in, and feels like there's something new every day. What we've had in the last couple of days is moves towards at least a kind of cessation of fighting in Ukraine. I'll put it no stronger than that, because what we've got is that there's a deal that's been struck between Ukraine and Russia, but with the United States kind of mediating this as well, for there to be at least no kind of fighting within the Black Sea, but also the resumption of trading kind of grain and stuff as well, which is really helpful for Africa and elsewhere as well. So that's good news, but it's not good news for NATO, because actually what's happening with NATO is that this is a huge defeat, and there's no way that they can sprinkle perfume on it, they can wrap it in a bow, they can put a nice wrap around it, but the fact is this is a huge defeat for NATO, and that's led to many of the NATO countries scrambling around now. So you've got Britain calling this summit and that summit, trying to get people together to say that we really have a role in mediating peace within Ukraine, when actually they have zero role. They have been told that by the US, that they have no role in this at all. Now, of course, by saying that, what that actually means is it's actually dawned on the Europeans now that actually they, I suppose it really comes back to this thing that the least safest place to be is to be a friend of the US. And that is essentially where Europe has been exposed now. They have no role in this. They've been told by the US, up your defense spending, and you must do that, and then we'll even bother to kind of acknowledge your existence. So all of them are scrambling to do that, and still their existence is not being acknowledged. As I speak to you, the British Chancellor just recently sat down from her spring statement. So it's essentially an emergency statement, where she's confirmed that there's going to be an extra 2.2 billion pounds put into the military in Britain, on top of the already massive military budget that there already is. But it's, where is that money coming from, given that Britain has such a tight financial situation at the moment? Well, where it's coming from is that they're taking it out of welfare. So they're slashing the welfare budget. They're slashing public sector jobs to put into the military. If it was just Britain, you could just attack Starmer's lack of politics, frankly. But actually, it's more than that. This is wider. This is something that's taking place across the whole of Europe. Just 2 weeks ago, the German government, in fact, they're not even a government yet. This is a coalition that's being put together. So the right-wing coalition, the Christian Democrats, trying to form a coalition with the Social Democrats, because the second biggest party are the far right within Germany, so direct descendants of the Nazis, So they're trying to put together a coalition. But before even the coalition is put together, a deal has been done to review the way that the finances are done within Germany so that they can put extra money into the military. This is a marvelous excuse for the German right wing to boost their military credentials. So what we're seeing across the whole of Europe, we're seeing the same sort of discussions within France, very hawkish behaviour by Macron in France, and we're seeing it across other places. We're seeing it in Poland, we're seeing it across the Scandinavian countries, we're seeing it against the Baltic countries. We're seeing everybody rushing towards putting more money into the military and slashing public services, slashing the welfare budgets. And this is a really dangerous time. And this is where people really have to understand what's going on. And we need to build those kind of cross-European alliances and linking with folks in the US who are facing the same things, because the root of all of this is coming from Trump, really. And that's the danger that we face. So really dangerous times, a boon for the military industrial complex, but in the end, working class people across Europe, as we're seeing in the US, are under the cosh right now.
Yeah, well, the military contractors in the United States are definitely happy about all of the new money that's coming into them. And it is looking like we're at a moment of increased war. We're not turning away from militarism, but we seem to be embracing it even more. And there's a really important conflict happening right now in the heart of Africa, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that has received very little attention. Prasanth, can you tell us what's the latest in the DRC in these past couple of months?
Right. So what's happening in the DRC is in some ways new. Of course, there's a fresh round of attacks, a massive amount of displacement, but in some ways it's a continuation of what's been happening for decades now, since the late 90s at least. And one major reason it has been happening for so long, for these past two decades actually, is the fact that there's been complete impunity for those involved. And that's basically the governments of Rwanda and Uganda. Rwanda specifically, the latest sort of bout of violence, so to speak, has involved what is called the M23 rebel group. Now, a lot of media would portray it as some kind of rebel group, but the fact is basically it's a full-fledged Rwandan proxy. And now, to be fair, it's so obvious that it's a Rwandan proxy that a lot of media, which was earlier a bit circumspect about it, has now started calling it so. So I guess that's some kind of improvement. But this M23 rebel group, starting from January, has taken over key cities and key towns in the North Kivu and South Kivu provinces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We have Goma, we have Bukavu. There's one more city which fell recently. And they have basically set up their own administration. The DRC's troops have really struggled to sort of contain their advance. A lot of reports making it very clear that it's not just these rebel fighters. Rwandan soldiers are in the DRC. Now, the numbers vary. The most conservative estimates say 4,000 Rwandan soldiers, but the numbers could be, reports on the ground say that could be up to 10,000 Rwandan soldiers who are in the DRC or who are fighting in the DRC. And they set up their, like I said, they set up their administration. A lot of atrocities meted out on the people, executions. There have been reports of rapes, and like I said, already a humanitarian crisis existing in that part of the region. But I think the latest numbers say that I think some 700,000 people were fled between November 24 and January, and that was before even these major attacks started. So you can assume that the situation has become much, much worse in their interim period. And very important to note that, like I said, this is not a new conflict. It's been very evident that Rwanda has been backing the M23 group for many, many years now. The linkages are very clear. A lot of this has to do with the DRC's mineral wealth. And right now, what is happening is that, say, for instance, there's a Rubaya mine, which is a key source of coltan. Coltan used for a lot of electronics today in today's world. The M23 controls it, gets $800,000 a month in tax revenues from that mine. And all this coltan is sent to Rwanda. and it becomes mixed with Rwanda's exports, and Rwanda's exports actually go across the world. Or for that matter, you have gold, which has really emerged as one of the key exports, key minerals in this region. Again, Rwanda's gold revenue surging, so you can assume that there's a lot of smuggling or illegal transportation taking place as well. So we are seeing, on the one hand, a full-scale loot of the DRC's wealth. On the other hand, Rwanda, trying to really expand its sphere of influence, and it is possible only because Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, is one of the closest allies of the West, of the United States, or the United Kingdom, many other European countries. People might remember how Rwanda was supposed to be this destination for immigrants who the United Kingdom wanted to expel just a few years ago. So the fact is that even some of these countries have been forced to impose restrictions on Rwanda, shows how blatant the violations, the violence, the attacks have become. And I think Congolese activists, we've carried many stories in the past. Congolese activists have been insisting that at the root of all this is the impunity that Paul Kagame, key officials in Rwanda, key officials in Uganda have been getting for all these years. And I think that is the fundamental question, that without that justice for the people of the DRC, short-term ceasefires or pauses in fighting are not going to address this issue. We'll have another round of fighting, maybe in a couple of years, even more deadly, who knows. So I think that's what the people are facing over there.
Well, I encourage everyone to check out a beautiful piece that Kate from South Africa wrote about an artist who was killed in Goma, who had released a song, who had been recording a video for his song precisely about M23 and the impunity that reigns supreme in that region. But now moving to a different continent, more impunity, more violations of human rights, is the situation of the mass deportations from the United States to Latin America. One case that has really perhaps sort of shocked the world and many people was what happened last week when 238 people, mostly all from Venezuela, were deported to El Salvador in complete sort of an unprecedented, uncharted waters, accused under the 1798 Alien Enemy Act of being from a foreign invading force. They are, of course, accused of being part of a gang called Tren de Aragua. And this case is really shocking and concerning for a number of reasons. One is that essentially these 238 people were rounded up 2 weekends ago, not given any warning, were not given communications to their lawyers, to their families. They were put on planes and sent to El Salvador, where they were received by the government of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, who's of course famous for building these supermax prisons. They're proceeded to be recorded while they're brutalized, while they're chained up, their heads are shaved, and then they're sent into these massive facilities where the Nayib Bukele government has been detaining tens of thousands of young people and essentially accusing them of the same crime of being part of gangs. And really, what was the crime of these Venezuelan migrants? It was having tattoos. Reports have come out in recent days because, of course, at first, nobody knew who these Venezuelans were. Who was deported? Why were they deported? Were they actually part of the gang? And it turns out a lot of them had nothing to do with any gang activity whatsoever. Family members who were desperately trying to find out what had happened because, for example, a lot of these had been in detention in Customs and Border Patrol facilities before that, had been, for example, present on the locator, which is where you kind of find out what detention facility people are in, and then they disappeared. So, there's no information. A lot of people find out through videos that circulate on social media of these migrants arriving to El Salvador, through photos that were taken by journalists who happened to be there. And then later, a list was leaked of the 238 people who were actually sent there. And again, in the past, since then, family members have been coming out and saying that, my son, my daughter had nothing to do with anything involving criminal violence. There's really harrowing cases of people, for example, who were crossing into the United States with their entire family, and they were picked off because they have tattoos. And in this kind of desperate effort of the Trump administration to criminalize migrants, to say they're all part of gangs, to say they're violent, to say that, you know, they must be removed. And this is the number one enemy that the people of the United States have. They essentially just said, okay, who looks the most like a criminal? It's these people with tattoos, which is completely, you know, it's reminiscent of, you know, 20th century kind of these narratives of, okay, gang member tattoo. As you see in the video, the people of Venezuela have very strongly rejected these actions. Family members are taking part in these mass mobilizations called for by the government, who has demanded their safe return to Venezuela. Venezuela has been open to receiving deportation flights. So the fact that these people were sent to El Salvador is, again, very, very concerning. It's a violation of their rights. None of these people were afforded a trial. None of these people ever saw a judge. None of these people ever had a chance to defend themselves and say, actually, I have nothing to do with these gangs. And so it's a really, again, it's a precedent-setting move. It's very similar to what we saw when the UK government attempted to make this deal with Rwanda. That was defeated. And the US essentially has taken up these plans and implemented them in Latin America using the Guantanamo naval base, using El Salvador, which essentially offered its prisons to Trump in its mass deportation campaign. So again, very concerning. The people of Venezuela continue to fight for their return. Again, there's been many mass mobilizations, campaigns that are running to really demand that these people be released and be afforded their basic rights as humans and as people who were detained in the United States, where there actually are legal processes in place and you can't actually do these sorts of things. So very concerning thing that we're going to continue to follow. And again, we're going to head back to the African continent, where another war rages on, a civil war in Sudan. We've all been following it for the past couple of years. Roger, what's the latest?
Yeah, I think the last time that that we were on, and this was one of the stories that we were covering then. This has been this war has been going on now for nearly 2 years. 15th of April will be 2 years, and I think we are moving towards, I think, some sort of end game, maybe. And I think we have to be optimistic about that, because in the meantime, over these 2 years, what we've seen is that literally millions of people have been displaced. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people, you know, in real trouble. We've seen a famine across Sudan, but the fighting continues. Just last week, though, we saw the Sudanese military regaining control of the palace in the middle of Khartoum, and also some other kind of key sites as well. And that's really important, that there's been some progress there. But in the meantime, what we also have is still over in Darfur, is we still have many of those areas still controlled by the RSF. And that's extremely worrying. Actually, there's many things to be worried about on both sides. There's lots of aid organizations who are saying that both sets of fighters have been engaged in war crimes. And one of the things that I think that is easy is to decouple from this, that I think we should be making clear to people, is that we've got this civil war taking place in Sudan. There's a real potential for another civil war to take place in South Sudan as well. And if that happens, we've got a real kind of swathe of Africa that is in real difficulties, and where again the arms manufacturers are going to be making loads of money. But also you've got to be wondering, I was asking this question at a meeting just a couple of weeks ago, you must always ask the question, where are they getting these arms from? where are they getting the money to be able to continue these conflicts? And the answer is really quite simple. And I think the importance of a program like this is that we are the ones who are able to keep saying and keep making those links that the American arms companies are continuing to make an absolute mint out of all this, whilst the people of Sudan, the people of South Sudan, the people of Congo, and many other places are paying the price for that. So I think one of the things that the peace movement needs to really make sure that we include in our discussions about the kind of campaigns for peace across the world is that we don't just talk about Gaza, as important as that is, and we don't just talk about Lebanon and Ukraine and so on, but that we must also remember that in Africa there are millions of people who are suffering because of these conflicts. So I guess we'll continue to report what's happening in Sudan, and let's hope that there's some progress towards a stop in fighting that just doesn't rely on somebody beating somebody else. That there's because the problem with that, of course, is that it's a recipe for another war at some point. There's got to be a way of ending this that goes back, that remembers that one of the things that happened with both the military and the RSF in the first place was they both undermined civilian rule. And that we must go back to that. So our kind of support must be for the people of Sudan to make sure that they get their right to be able to have a government of the people that is not just another military kind of rule that's going to be placed on them. So challenging times, I think, but hopefully we're coming to some sort of conclusion, but it must be a conclusion that prioritizes the needs of the people and not just is something that is just about the military has won, therefore they'll carry on ruling in a dictatorial way. This must be about going back to the people's parliament.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's interesting, and we've covered this a lot at People's Dispatch with Pavan Kulkarni, that really the civil society movements had been warning that this was the logical outcome when you have two competing military factions usurping civilian rule, which is why they had consistently demanded full civilian control of all of the governing bodies. That is what the People's Movement have consistently demanded. That was not a demand the international community was willing to get behind. So hopefully in this round, we'll see significant progress towards that. Well, we've brought you on another whirlwind. It's really great to be back on this show. There's nowhere else where you're going to get stories from the African continent, from Latin America. Next time we'll be touching on Asia for sure. We want to know what's happening in that massive continent. But really, thank you everyone for joining us, for tuning in. Make sure to follow our show, follow People's Dispatch, follow Morningstar. Tune in every week. We're really excited to be back. And this was Give the People What They Want, back in 2025.